Hi, I'm Daniela of ABCRAFTY, and today I'm excited to show you this leather purse making kit I was sent by Babylon Leather. It's my first time working with leather, so I can confirm it's beginner friendly and now makes me want to get more into leather crafts. That being said, I did find their instructions confusing at times, so I'm hoping this video can be another option and help you avoid the same mistakes I made. By the way, I've linked to this specific kit in the description, and you can get 20% off with the code ABCRAFTY. And with their current holiday sale, you'll actually get 33% off with that code. Each kit comes with all the pre-cut and punched pieces, hardware, and tools aside from a lighter. I also found pliers can be helpful. So now moving on to the construction, you want to find the two side pieces and the large piece. Take note which is the outside and inside. In case you're unsure, look at the handles. The outside will be the same color as the handles. The first thing you do is sew around the large oval holes. There are 4 on each of the side pieces and 4 on the large piece. Take the thread and measure out 3 times the length of the side piece on the longer side. This is when I realized the snippers I received were bent and unusable, so I switched to a pair of scissors which worked just fine. Thread the needle and then poke the needle through the thread about an inch or 2 from the end, then pull it tight. This secures the thread. Then repeat that with another needle on the other end. You'll work with 1 thread and 2 needles the whole time. Now take a side and pass the needle through one of the pinholes with the outside color facing up. Then pass the other needle through the next pinhole, so both needles will be at the front. Pull on the needles so each side is the same length. Take the needle from the first pinhole and pass it through the second hole. Be careful not to poke through the thread in the second hole. Then bring it back up through the third pinhole. You've now completed the stitch that you'll use for the entire project. From here, it's just about repeating that same process. So again, take the thread that's in the back and pass it through the next pinhole. Then bring it up in the next empty pinhole. By the way, I happen to choose thread that matched the color of the leather, but you can also choose white thread if you want the thread more noticeable. Once you sew all the way around the circle, you want to finish with both threads on the back. Then snip off the ends, leaving about 2 millimeters. Next, take a lighter and carefully melt the ends. Make sure you don't burn the stitches. Repeat this for the rest of the oval holes. To do this, you'll first need to remove the thread from the needles. I found it was easiest to locate the end that passed through the needle and pull that out, then slide the rest off the needle. This is how the pieces will look after you've done all of the oval holes. The next step is to sew the inside pocket. For this, you'll need the rectangular piece. Measure the thread so it is 3 times the length of the longer side. You'll sew one side of the pocket, folding the material over. Start at one end and sew the first 3 stitches. Count out 5 pinholes. As you come up through the 5th pinhole, fold the material over and go through the pinhole on the folded over part. Then continue to sew through both pieces of leather. When you get to the end, bring both threads to the back. This means you'll sew backwards over a stitch. Snip the ends and melt them with a lighter. Next, you'll sew along the pocket opening and down the other side. Measure out 4 times the length of both the long and short sides. Start at the first pinhole on the folded part. You'll go down from the outside and out between both layers. Continue to sew across the pocket. Once you get to the end, you need to sew the other side. The original instructions have you go up the short side first, using only 1 thread. But I found it easier to just go down the longer side and then do the shorter side separately. Make sure to count out 5 pinholes from the end and go through the 5th pinhole. Then continue sewing the longer side. When you get to the end, trim the threads and melt the ends. Now thread the needles with 2 times the length of that full side. Then sew from the opposite end to finish up that side. Overlap at least 1 stitch with the section you already sewed and bring both ends to the back. This means you'll end up doing a back stitch to secure it. Trim the threads and melt them with a lighter. This will complete the pocket, so you can set it aside for later. Next, you're going to attach the base to the bottom of the purse. You want the inside color facing up for both pieces. I messed this up, so my large piece is the wrong color. you can use the provided clip to hold the bottom pad in place. Note that there will be extra pinholes to the sides on the large piece. Measure out 4 times the length in thread. Then put the needle through the extra hole on the larger piece. The second needle will go through the adjacent hole through both pieces. Continue to sew the 2 pieces together on that side. Sew all the way to the end, including the stitch that is only on the large piece. Then backstitch so both threads are on the same side. Cut the threads and melt the ends. Repeat the steps for the other side. Measure out the thread again, sew it, and melt the ends. Next, we're going to sew the lanyard and key. You'll need the piece that looks like a bow and the long thin piece. You'll notice on the long piece that one end has a slit and the other has holes. Slide on the bow shape and then slide the key onto the side with the holes. Fold the end over so the 2 holes on each side line up. Then prepare the thread. I ended up using scrap thread, but if you're cutting new thread, make it the length of the thin piece. There are only 2 holes to sew. Therefore, put 1 needle through each hole. Then you'll keep sewing through the 2 holes. I had a lot of trouble getting the needle all the way through, so ended up using my shirt to grab the needle and then eventually some pliers. You'll definitely want to use the clip to hold it in place, but I found it easiest to start without the clip until 1 round was complete. After the first round, I saw it wasn't as tight as I'd like it to be, so I did a second round. Make sure both threads are coming out the bottom, then cut them and melt the ends. Next, you're going to sew the key cover, each side at a time. Fold it over and measure out the thread to 8 times the length. By the way, when you fold it over, make sure the pretty side is facing out and that the opening is facing the key. Line up the holes and use the binder clip to hold it in place. I found it easiest to start at the open end and sew towards the side that's folded over. Continue sewing until you reach the end, then cut the thread. I waited to melt the ends until I did the other side so I could do them all at once, but the next step is to repeat the process on the other side. Then melt all the ends. Now the lanyard is complete and you can pull the key out of the cover or slide the cover back over the key. And the purpose of the slit on the other end is so you can pass the cover and key through it, making a loop. This is how you'll attach it to the purse at the end. Next, we're going to sew the 2 straps. You'll notice on each end there are marker holes that are larger than the others. You'll start at one of the smaller marker holes and sew all the way around to the marker hole on the other end. Measure out the thread to 10 times the length between the marker holes. The original instructions say only 8 times, but you'll see on this first one I barely had enough. So a general tip is to measure more than you think, as there's plenty of thread. As mentioned, start at one of the smaller marker holes and sew to the larger one. When you get to the end, you'll sew across to the other large marker hole. Then continue sewing the other side until you get to the other small marker hole. Grab the large piece and make sure the outside is facing out. You're going to sew these straps onto the marked areas next to the holes on either side. As you sew down through the marker hole, you'll also sew through the corresponding hole on the large piece. Then continue to sew through both pieces, making sure the holes are aligned. When you get to the other marker hole, you'll want to backstitch 2 stitches. This is when it became difficult having a shorter thread, so be sure to measure out that extra length. And for some reason, it was difficult for me here, so I used pliers to get the needle through. Pass the threads to the back side and snip them off. I waited to melt both sets of ends at the same time, but you could also do it now. Flipping it over, this is what it should look like. Repeat the process for the other strap, measuring the thread to 10 times the length, sewing the border of the strap, and then lining it up on the larger piece and sewing them together. Backstitch 2 stitches, cut the ends, and now melt both sets of ends. Next up is the handle. Take note of the top and bottom. The bottom is the flat side, and the top is the side with the ridge. We're going to sew the border around the handle, so you'll want to measure the thread so that it's 9 times the length of the handle. You always want at least 4 times the length of what you're sewing. Since we're going all the way around, we need to double that, and then I like to add a little buffer. Since you're sewing the whole handle, it doesn't matter where you start. I chose to start at the corner. For most of the handle, I needed to use pliers to get the needle through. The material was just too thick. And then when I got to the other end, I saw that on mine, the pinholes were basically on top of the metal and didn't line up nicely. This made sewing the holes very difficult. I had to slowly and carefully fuss with it until the needle went through the other side. Hopefully yours is punched better, but just know that yes, I had trouble with this part. Continue to sew all the way around and bring both threads to the back, which is the flat side. Then trim them and melt the ends. Next, you're going to add the 2 side pieces to the handle. Hold the handle upside down so the flat part is facing up. Take a side piece so the inside is facing up. Then slide the more narrow end between the metal openings. Once it's through, fold it over. The 3 pinholes on the more narrow side should line up with the row of pinholes on the wider side. Next, get your large piece with the outside facing up. Line up the side piece of the handle with one of the corresponding sets of pinholes. Measure the thread so it's 4 times the length of the handle. To sew the handle sides to the large piece, it's easiest to start at the point since it's easily identifiable on both pieces. I went up through the large piece at the point and then up through the point of the handle side. Then continue to sew around, making sure to keep all of the holes lined up as you sew close to the metal. I forgot to film the rest of this one, but this is how it will look when it's all done. For the other side, slide the side piece through the metal, making sure the larger part is on top when it's folded over. FYI, to get this side to line up with the large piece, you'll need to bend the handle. You can see the difficult part of this step is keeping the folded part under while you sew near the metal. The other challenge I had was keeping everything nice and tight, so my recommendation is to make sure you pull tight after each stitch and make sure it's all flush against the large piece. I didn't do that as much on the first side, so that side is not as close to the large piece as I'd like. For reference, this is what I mean by pulling tight. Literally after each pass of the needle, I pulled on each thread to make sure the prior stitches were completely secure. Once you go all the way around, backstitch 2 stitches, cut the threads, and melt the ends. Here's how the handle should look when complete. You can see the left side on mine is slightly raised near the metal as compared to the one on the right, so pull those threads tight. Next, we're going to sew on part of the clasp. Turn the large piece around and locate the rectangle of pinholes. Place the clasp on top and measure out thread so that it's 5 times the length of the edge. This is a good approximation of the perimeter of the rectangle. Sew all the way around. It doesn't matter where you start, but it was easiest for me to match up one of the corners. After you're done, bring the threads to the back, clip them, and melt the ends. Now it's time for the side panels. Notice which side is the inside and which is the outside. You want the outside color to be facing out on both the side piece and large piece. Then line up the edges. Measuring this next thread length is where I recommend doing something different than the original instructions, as well as what I do here. I do it correctly on the other side panel, though. Therefore, even though I say to measure 4 times the shown length, you actually want to do 4 times the perimeter of the side panel plus 4 times the length of the edge of the large piece. You're going to sew the panel to the large piece and then along the top of the purse. The original instructions say to only sew part way up the side piece, but that overcomplicates it. Either way, you're going to start this panel differently than before. Take 1 needle and pass it through and pull the threads so they're even. Then take the same needle and wrap it over the top and pass it back through so it forms a loop around both pieces. Then continue as normal, sewing the pieces together. When you get to the end of that side, you need to go around the corner. I found this easiest to do by going through the hole on each piece separately. Pass the needle across and through the pinhole on the corner, then go through the next available pinhole on the large piece. Keep sewing for the next stitch or 2 past the corner. Then you'll be able to lift the side up and pull tight. I found it helpful to pinch the corner in to help shape the leather a bit. Now you can use a clip to hold everything in place and continue sewing. When you get to the next corner, you can lift up the other side. Unlike the first corner, I found it easier to sew with the side lifted. Be sure to use the clip to help keep the pieces together. Keep sewing up the side. You'll see if you follow the original instructions, your thread will end around here. They want you to backstitch and pass the thread through to the inside of the purse and cut and melt the ends. This all seems super unnecessary to me, as it was also tricky to melt the ends on the inside. I have no clue how you would be able to do it on the other side when you wouldn't be able to open the purse as wide. So here's how I actually recommend doing the sides. As I said before, what you'll sew is the side panel and the top edge of the purse. Therefore, to me, it makes sense to have the threads from both side panels meet somewhere along that top edge. This way, you don't need to pass threads to the middle or finagle your way melting the ends. So what you need to measure in thread is 4 times that length. To do this, I measured the long edge of the side panel 4 times and the small edge 4 times. Then, as you can see, I measured the top edge 4 times as well, making sure to include the distance around the corners. I added plenty extra as my plan was to continue sewing until I reached where the other side panel left off. Then you can sew this side panel like the first, making sure to loop around that first stitch. Continue sewing on the side panel just as before, but when you reach the end, keep going onto the top of the purse. I continued nearly all the way around, but if you follow my recommendation, you can have them meet anywhere on the top part. I wanted mine to meet around here, so I stopped here and backstitched. Now I needed to make up the rest of the distance, so I started overlapping a few stitches on the first panel and continued sewing until I met up with the other set of stitches. This is what it should look like for you to have the ends meet somewhere along the top. To finish it, overlap a few stitches and bring the ends to the inside. Then cut and melt them. To me, this is much easier to simply have them meet on the top part like this, instead of along the side panel. Here's how it should look. The purse is finally taking shape. Now we can move on to the last piece of sewing. You're going to sew the pocket into the purse and sew along the top edge. You'll need thread that's 4 times the length of this distance. I found it easiest to measure the front of the purse first and then turn the purse on its side and measure that 8 times plus some for a buffer. Pass the needle through the first stitch on just the side panel so that it comes out on the inside of the purse. Then continue to sew the side panel until you get to the last stitch. Coming from the inside, you'll pass the needle to the outside on just the side panel. But when you're going through the last pinhole from the outside of the purse, pass it through both the side panel and the front piece. Now take the thread that's still on the side panel and pass it from the outside into the first stitch on just the front piece. It will make a loop over both pieces. This brought both threads to the front panel so you can continue sewing. Sew the first 4 stitches and stop before the 6th pinhole. This is a marker pinhole and is where you'll attach the pocket. Slide the pocket in so that the longer side is touching the front piece. You should be able to see the pocket opening on the inside of the purse. Use the binder clip to hold it in place so that the first hole of the pocket aligns with the 6th pinhole. Then continue to sew as normal, going through both pieces. When you get to the other end, you'll need to go around the corner as before. Showing the process again, the needle that's coming from the inside of the purse goes to the front through just the front piece. Then the needle on the outside goes through both pieces, coming out on the outside of the side panel. As you can see, I snapped the needle during this process, but thankfully Babylon Leather provides a bunch of needles, so I switched to a new one. Then, you need to bring the front needle to the side panel by looping over the top, and then going through the first stitch from the outside and to the center of the purse. It helps to bend the corner open to get the stitch between the pieces. From there, you can continue to sew the side panel. When you get to the end, you'll need to pass each needle through the last hole. Again, this can be made easier by bending open the corner. Then do a few back stitches to make sure it's all secure and bring both threads to the center of the purse. And now, for the last time, you can cut the threads and melt the ends. The next step is to weave the straps through the slits. Starting from the back, you'll go in the first hole and out the next. Continue this pattern of weaving in and out until you come out the last hole at the front. Turn the purse around and repeat the process with the other strap. To make the straps fit all the way to the buckle, allow the side panels to form an accordion fold. Next, you're going to add the hardware to the bottom of the purse. You'll have 5 sets of these in the kit, but you only need 4 of them. The screw goes on the inside through one of the holes at the bottom, then the stud screws onto it from the outside. Take the provided screwdriver and tighten the screw while holding the stud. Repeat the process for the other 3 studs. Next, you're going to add the hardware for the front of the clasp. It will come screwed together, so you first need to remove the screws and detach the pieces. The side with the pieces that stick out goes on the outside of the purse. Hopefully your piece will fit nicely, but as you can see, mine did not line up with the holes. Therefore, I had to get creative and lined up the first small hole. Then I took the other piece with the shiny side face out, put a screw through one of the holes, and screwed it into the hole I had lined up. The other side was more difficult, and I found the best way to get the other screw in was to pull on the leather so it bunched a bit. It's not ideal, but I honestly don't notice it now. The straps and lock cover it anyways, so it really isn't visible. The last part of the assembly is to attach the hardware to the straps. You'll see the nubs that stick out will align with the holes on each strap. To attach them, you simply push each nub through the hole. I will say this is much easier said than done, as I found it super difficult, though I also don't have good hand strength. Now finally you get to the most satisfying part of all, peeling off the protective plastic. Pull the straps over the buckle to close it. From here, it's just a matter of attaching all the accessories. Use the key to open the lock. Wrap the key lanyard around the handle, and attach the shoulder strap if you'd like. I left the strap off mine, but either way, your Kelly purse is now complete. Let me know in the comments if there are other instructions you'd like me to recreate. And as always, be sure to give this video a like if you found it helpful. And to see what I'm crafting day to day, follow me on Instagram and Facebook, as that's where I've been the most active lately.